Hello, Johnson County. Welcome to this episode of the Texas Transparency Project, where we pull back the curtain on government and local politics that impact our lives. I'm your host, Greg Cooper, and today we're highlighting topics that will be being discussed during the current 89th Texas legislative session, specifically public education. Today we're hosting Eileen Blakowski, the lead parent advocate for Texas Education 911, a Texas nonprofit corporation. And we're going to get right into that right after our video. And we're back. And this is Greg Cooper again with Texas Transparency Project. And before we dive into school issues, public education issues that are going to be thoroughly discussed down in the 89th legislative session in Austin with Eileen Blakowski, we'd like to thank Ep1 Ranch and Outdoors. Ep1 Ranch and Outdoors are a trusted source for animal supply, feed, animal care, archery, and more. Ep1 Ranch and Outdoors follows a tradition of the Ep1 family of businesses founded by Fernando Rodriguez, where quality, customer service, and a commitment to improving the community come together. Ep1's mission statement is to provide goods and services to their customers while creating a team approach to customer service and a commitment to continual improvement while actively supporting the community. Ep1 Ranch and Outdoors is located at 1501 North Main Street in Cleburne. That's 1501 North Main Street in Cleburne. And Ep1 Ranch and Outdoors can be reached at 817-666-1164. That is 817-666-1164. 1164. Ep1 Ranch and Outdoors serves all your Johnson County and beyond needs regarding ranch and outdoors. And with that, we want to welcome Eileen Blakowski, who is the lead parent advocate for Texas Education 911, which advocates for parents in the public education sphere down in Austin. Eileen, welcome to Texas Transparency Project. And how goes your day?
Hey there, Greg. Always great to see you again. Doing really well. Enjoying what is this second winter in Texas? Is it second or third winter? Which one are we on?
Well, we've gone through what, 2, 3 false falls now, or false springs now, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So, so Texas Education 911 is an advocacy group. What is the mission for Texas Education 911? Why is it important, and why should parents be concerned about the great advocacy work that you're doing in local ISDs throughout Texas and down in Austin?
Yes. Well, Texas Education 911 was founded by parents. We like to say that we bring parent-identified solutions to parent-identified problems in Texas public schools. And so we have an advocacy network of parents all over the state, and each one of us has experienced our own issues where our child was in the crosshairs of something in a Texas public school, having navigated that problem and found it very, shall we say, it's just frustrating. It's frustrating, and you often don't see a just outcome, and it doesn't matter what your issue is or what part of the state you're in. It's systemic, actually. And so having dealt with that frustration, some parents came together and decided that we would begin to be the solution that we want to see until we can bring legislative change that reflects what would be more just and fair outcomes for parents and students, right? We're the biggest stakeholder in the education system. We pay our taxes and we entrust our children to the schools. So it's very, very important that a parent voice be involved in the discussions about what's wrong with our schools or what needs to be fixed, what can be improved, and also the legislative solutions that are considered. So that's who we are and what we do. And if a child is harmed in a Texas public school, we want to help.
Absolutely. And just to bring everybody up to speed and remind everybody, we're currently in the 89th legislative session. And the reason that an issue like advocacy and public education is so important currently is because Texas legislation is only in session for approximately 5 to 6 months without special sessions every 2 years. So it's fast and furious. So any major changes legislatively that are going to occur in public education are going on right now. The legislative session opened last month in January. So it's really important that people are aware of what's going on in public education and pay attention to that very intently. And it is time sensitive because of the end date for the legislative session, which will be in June. So, Eileen, how did you get involved advocating for parents? You touched a little bit based on that, but what makes you want to devote so much of your free time to go to Austin? And how did that happen?
Well, I would say, like most of the parent advocates, I had an issue with my own child in my own school. It didn't even start here in Texas. Frankly, I moved here for a little over 4.5 years ago from California, and we had a lot of education issues there. And so when I moved here, I thought I would be retiring from all of that grassroots work. But I found out pretty quickly that actually the education system in Texas has its own brand of problems. They're unique and different, and in some ways more complicated. And so when my own child had an issue with content, inappropriate content in a class, and I brought that forward, I learned about the grievance process. Not every state has that. It would be nice for that process to be effective and to deliver just outcomes. It did in that particular case, but I started meeting other parents who said, well, how did you get what you wanted? And I don't know how to do that. And most people don't know about a grievance process. And so as I started liaising with other people and attending just some political events or school board meetings, I ran into people who were saying, how do we fix this? How do we get this outcome? And we just came together. And so we met people from all over the state, thankfully, and we were connected with one another. And we've all had that situation where our child was the target of something. And essentially, at this point, the system is so broken and the children are being harmed. I mean, sometimes physically or sexually, sometimes it's academic, sometimes it has to do with their opportunities on clubs, sports teams, you name it. But at this point, the grave impact on the young people, the least among us, right? They don't have a voice. They don't have a fully formed frontal lobe. They can't really speak for themselves. They're not a legal entity in and of them. They need parents to speak for them. And it's some of these are so egregious that it's just become a burden, really a burden on my heart. I'm sure we'll talk about this too, but our most recent work is a 22-page report on school employee misconduct. And that's a nice way of saying our children are being abused physically and sexually by the adults in the school that we are entrusting to take care of them. This is an epidemic that needs to be addressed. And I mean, immediately. I mean, kids are literally being harmed. So this is sort of what I call the tip of the iceberg. It is a big problem and it needs to be solved, but there are so many other issues underneath that. And whether we've run into them ourselves or we've come across other parents who've reached out to us to say, hey, can you help with this? It's just a burden that's on our hearts. We can't say no. The Lord put it there, and we're just going to be obedient to the call to do something about it.
Absolutely, and in full disclosure, I also moved from California, and I don't know about you, but I get a bad rap for moving from California. There's a lot of there's definitely two types of people that have moved from other states, and Texas is in trouble in not grasping how quickly things can change for the negative in something like the public education space. And I fight for that as well. We've been down to Austin at the same time, fighting for the same things before. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for what Texas Ed 911 does. We talked a little bit about what you do. We're going to get into some of your legislative priorities here. So I'm going to put up on the screen here Texas Education 911 website, and we're going to walk through their mission and their legislative priorities. So walk us through what you guys specifically do, and then the legislative priorities, and then we'll talk about the report you cited. I mean,
great. Yes. Well, we do. We bring parent-identified solutions to Texas education, and we do that in a very particular way. We feel like it's really important to be grassroots that are professionalized, and so we try and prepare parents for how to do that well. And we call these the 4 Ls. This is the way Texas Education 911 operates. We start with love. And That might sound corny to some people, but what I mean by that is if you understand the classical understanding of love, which is willing the good of the other, okay, willing the good of the other. That means we want the best outcome for everybody we touch, whether that's a parent or a lawmaker or a teacher or an administrator. So we start with love and respect for everybody that we speak with. This is a very frustrating process, and we need to train our sights on being professional, on being honest, and on being driving towards solutions. We are not complainers. We are not Karens. We are not cavers, citizens against virtually everything, which parents have been called sadly by the Texas State Bar Education Lawyers Conference. Crazy that came from there, but it did. So we just try and gird people with understanding that, start with love and respect and honesty at all times. Then we help parents learn. Help them learn, whether it's the board policy, whether it's education law, their rights as parents, all that kind of thing, how the grievance process works, where to access those forms, the timelines and all of that kind of a thing, including the legislative session and how to participate in that, how to contact their lawmakers. And then we help leverage our networks. Sometimes it's relationships that we have with lawmakers, or sometimes it's something like this, the opportunity to tell their story on a podcast or to get their story out to a broader network. And then eventually we equip them to lead. Come and speak for your child, represent them well in a grievance, come and speak to your lawmakers, stand up for what you know is right, contribute to good, positive policy change. And that's what we are about. That's how we go about the things that we do.
And the reality of it, public education, when you start talking about teachers and students, I've dealt with a lot of different ISDs, dealt with a lot of different groups in Austin, and emotions run high. And Texas Ed 911 does a really good job of keeping the boiling point down to where you can have conversations, no matter how far apart on issues you are, to try to come together and find common ground. And I think that that's great. And I think that it's great that one of the things that you do is equip to lead to help other peoples begin to do this. And the goal of this is a little introductory to Texas Ed 911 and what you guys are doing. And we're hoping that you can have a regular show at some point and begin to provide more content, especially during the legislative sessions with what's going on. But one of the biggest things that you guys have championed recently is known as the School Employee Misconduct Report.
Yes.
And this is one of the biggest things going on down in Austin right now that's being circulated. And I'm going to pull this up. For anybody listening, this is on the website. So your website is what, Eileen?
It's texased911.com.
And now this is what it looks like. And this is the homepage. And scrolling down to the School Employee Misconduct Report, you'll see it right here. And this is a 22-page document. Walk us through this. We're just going to touch briefly on this. We're going to do a bigger episode on this in the future. But what is this? What's going on in public schools? And then we'll talk about legislative priorities and some of the solutions that Texas Ed 911 has worked on.
Right. Well, I appreciate all the comments that you just made there, Greg, because we work really hard on being a group that bipartisan parents and bipartisan legislators can come to. The abuse of children is not red or blue. It is, it's a shame is what it is. But you know what? This is not something that is party aligned. And so we want people to know that they can come to us regardless of whatever their, political affiliation is. And the solutions to this are also bipartisan. And so what we've created here in this report, to answer your question specifically, is it's a rundown of the entire state database. We've been running after this information for about 2.5 years, and we looked into. Let's start here. I live in Prosper, and 2.5 years ago, a bus driver in Prosper was arrested for molesting 2 little girls in my school district, ages 5 and 7. They were sisters, and they were being molested for an entire year. He was finally arrested, but new board members that had just been elected were never told. Other families who had children on that bus were never told. And the community at large had no idea. There were whispers among bus drivers on social media, but nobody had any hard evidence. And a few months later, that was in May, and then in August, the family filed a federal lawsuit. And when that happened in August, the entire community erupted and said, how in God's name could this have happened? And how is it that nobody knew about this? I mean, how many other children had he been exposed to on buses over the years of driving a bus for school districts? And so this started for me. Just a desire to know what's supposed to happen. Did it happen here? Does it happen this way everywhere? How about other schools in my county? How about other schools in the state? So our group, our network of parents got together and submitted public information requests all over for districts all over the state until one of our advocates was speaking with a TEA employee, and they said, "Do you just want the whole database?" And she said, "Yes, we do." So they released the database to us. There was nothing nefarious. We didn't hack a system. The TEA, we requested it, and the TEA gave it to us. We have reported in this document here the outcomes of that data. And we also tell you how it is that this data came to be, what systemic problems are creating these incredible numbers. One highlight, 6,888 reports of sexual and violent misconduct by taxpayer-funded school employees that are being perpetrated on our students. This data only from September of 21 to July of 24. Okay, think about it. 6 of those months are summer months. So, I mean, kids aren't even in school then. Almost 7,000 reports. This is an epidemic problem. And we know that not all reports are made. And so we encourage people to go to our website, like you said, texas@911.com. Go scroll down to the bottom of that homepage and familiarize yourself with this data. It's shocking. And we will get into it in a future episode.
And so I'm going to bring up a graph here from your report, and just to give an idea. So this is figure 2. It's on page 6 of this report, and it's a distribution of 11,111 misconduct reports from 2021 to 2024. So this is reported in what's called PEMS. Is that where you got this data from, or is this not?
No, this is not in PEMS. This is a statutory database that was established in 2017 and 2019, 2 different pieces of legislation.
But it's a state-run database. Is that correct? These are their numbers?
It is. This is only accessible. This is the Educator Misconduct Reporting Portal.
Okay.
And so school districts report directly from the school district to the TEA. It's a password-protected system. I can't participate in this reporting, and you can't either. But the TEA has now begun to change things so that they have a complaint page. And so now they're getting reports from lots of different places. This data is reflective of what comes from school districts directly to the TEA.
Okay, so the graph that we're looking at now is a distribution of over 11,000 misconduct reports. And 10% of the misconduct reports are sexual in nature, 39% are violent in nature. And then there's some other categories. So we're talking about close to 50% of the misconduct reports fall into the category of violence or sexual misconduct. Is it fair to say that?
Yes, and I'd also point your attention to what they call a Code 10, which is an inappropriate relationship with a student. That's another sexual misconduct. That's another 13% further on down the chart there. So yeah, you are talking about almost 75% of the reports are sexual or violent in nature. Look, that doesn't surprise me because they aren't mandated to report these things to the TEA. They should be. The question is, with 5.5 million kids in our public schools, do we believe that there have only been 11,000 reports of misconduct of any kind? And do we believe that there were only 7,000 incidents of these in the last 3 or 4 years? That's a question, and probably it should be in everybody's mind.
And we all need to remember that, we're talking about minors in school that are sent to schools. Their parents are helping the kids understand the importance of trusting teachers, trusting staff, and children honestly are not capable of advocating for themselves the way adults are. So this is something that really needs to be looked at. And the great news with Texas Ed 911 is you guys stay fairly narrow focused on legislative priorities. A lot of education groups and a lot of people cover broad spectrum and try to cover a lot of stuff and become a jack of all trades, masters of none. But you guys have limited your priorities, especially during the 89th session. So we're going to pull up your legislative priorities here. So this is under legislative priorities tab on the Texas Ed 911 website. So let's begin to close out this introduction to Texas Ed 911 with your legislative priorities, and then talk about the future of what we hope kind of content you can provide on a more regular basis.
Absolutely. Well, we are excited about these legislative priorities because, like we talked about, we help parents from all over the state. And so when we hear the same kinds of things coming from the Panhandle and down in Corpus Christi and over in East Texas and in the DFW area and then out in El Paso, when you hear the same things being repeated over and over and over again by people who never met one another, you recognize you have systemic problems. So what Texas Ed 911 did in this legislative session is take a look at, we just took a 30,000-foot view, and we looked at the top line and we said, what are the pain points? Where are the places where the dysfunction exists? Where does the injustice stem from? And so we have 3 key legislative priorities, and then a 4th one that's a bit of a catch-all. The first one is to create an independent office of Inspector General for Education. This is not really novel. Other school districts, other states have implemented something like this. Not necessarily just for education, but they have had special investigative units for sex crimes and things like that. And so I would have you know that districts like the Chicago Public Schools and New York City Public Schools have this, but the state of Texas does not. And so in the deepest blue states, you have some of this kind of I don't know, at least it's a remedy or at least an oversight. So an inspector general would investigate waste, fraud, and abuse in our schools, but particularly the physical and sexual abuse of students. And it would take the investigative authority out of the hands of the ISD. That's where we're finding the majority of the problems are. When the investigations are happening in-house, there's a lot that gets swept under the rug.
And just to help our audience understand what you're talking about is when a parent, a staff member, or a community member brings a complaint against an ISD for something that they want adjudicated, it's called the grievance process. And the current system, the school district is basically judge and jury of themselves when this investigation, and you're looking for independent input into that adjudication process of those grievances. Is that kind of where this is going a little bit, to make sure that there's oversight and it's not the fox investigating the fox in the hen house, so to speak?
Definitely true when it comes to the physical and sexual assault of students. Those investigations should never be handled inside the school district. They need to be reported to outside law enforcement, and the investigations for these things, right? Because the school district is self-interested. They are their own employees, right? They're investigating their own employees. And we find that even the ISD police chiefs sometimes, and there's information about that in our report, even sometimes they are protective of the employees in the system. And so we would like to see independence there, independence from, like, the commissioner of education is an appointee of the governor. And so it doesn't make sense. Most inspector generals are appointed by the governor, but I don't believe it would give anybody in Texas any sense of peace knowing that a governor appointee was overseeing another governor appointee. So we're asking for independence from that structure, and we want this independent inspector general to be appointed by the State Board of Education. They are directly accountable to the voters, right? They are elected. And so we would like to see that person be appointed by the SBOE, and then also have the opportunity to provide due process reviews for grievances, for example, so that the local ISD can still manage its local process, but at least give us some due process review. If something doesn't go right, where's the opportunity to appeal? If anybody has been through this process, what they do know is that the commissioner often will say he does not have the authority or the jurisdiction to overturn someone's grievance or to make a determination. And so we want to get rid of all that confusion. So that's the inspector general. There's a lot that goes into it, a lot more we could talk about, but that's a general overview. Another important point, whistleblower protections, which many teachers today are suffering greatly and being targeted for bringing forward some issues. And we're talking to a lot more teachers these days. So we recognize they need help too. The parents and teachers are actually on the same page here. We want to see students protected. And
fear of retaliation is one of the biggest things I hear about why individuals will not come forward and use the what I'm going to call a poor process as it exists now, the grievance process. It's a poor process. This is beginning to fix that, one of your priorities, but that is the biggest thing that I consistently hear is fear of retaliation. This happened, here it is, but you can't use it. I don't want my name attached to it, but just so you know what's going on, please doing what you're doing. And I understand we were talking about children that are being entrusted in a public education system for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 18 years or 15 years, whatever. But this is a real fear that people need to come to grips with, and there needs to be some oversight and some protections when people have legitimate complaints and grievances that they need to be taken seriously.
Absolutely. And that's true for employees and for parents. And I mean, it just doesn't even matter whether you're in a giant school district like Houston ISD or you're in a very small rural district. It's systemic, and we've heard it from all corners of the state. So we know that's something that is desperately needed. The last point there on the Inspector General is the point that oftentimes when an investigation reveals that someone has done something like had an inappropriate relationship with a student, they are not always being referred for criminal prosecution. In fact, they're almost never referred for criminal prosecution. And if they are, it's because the crime was reported to outside law enforcement and it wasn't handled inside the school district. So we want to make sure that the Inspector General has either a memorandum of understanding or a lane or an authority to work with the Attorney General or your local DA to criminally prosecute where necessary.
Absolutely. And the overwhelming majority of selfless servants in school districts are great people.
Amazing.
They are looking for the best interest of the kids. They care about the kids. They want the best outcomes. But the bottom line is you're talking about a very, very large entity with a lot of people and personalities involved. So there are issues and they need to be addressed accordingly. So so thank you for having that as one of your priorities. Your second and third priorities, let's talk about those.
Yeah. So the second one is holding public schools and their employees civilly liable for physical and sexual abuse. This sounds like a no-brainer, but if you study Texas law, you'll find out that schools and their employees have almost blanket immunity from a lawsuit. Essentially, the only immunity or the only liability they have is the same you and I have when we drive a vehicle, just basically motor vehicle liability. That's not okay. It is essentially the reason why school districts and their employees are shielded right now. They continue to abuse with impunity, and it's wrong. It is a gross violation of constitutional freedom and rights to be able to redress your government. And if you're harmed at the hands of a school district employee, why are you not allowed to recover for damages?
So to let everybody know kind of why this is an issue, there's protectorates in place called qualified immunity for like elected officials and public servants. And nobody wants like frivolous lawsuits to be brought in mass against a local resident who's volunteering on a city council, volunteering on a school board, a teacher serving in a class. So protectorates in place are great. However, this is legislation that has gone way too far overboard, where the protections are so great and they are so protected that things are often it allows a recycling and a resetting of an employee that has gone through this misconduct process and been found to have some fault there, to just move from district to district to district. So there's the same thing in police departments sometimes, and this is a good example of good legislation that has gone too far in the protecting of issues. Is it fair to say that, Eileen?
Oh, yeah. We are absolutely at this point, we are shielding predators. We are shielding those who would do harm to our kids. And we keep doing it. And we have been doing it for over 30 years. And it's time to stop. And to be clear about what this priority does, we do have some language that we would recommend for a bill that would amend the Texas Tort Claims Act. We are just asking to exempt just strictly that behavior. If you physically harm a student, sexually harm a student, or you know about it, and you fail to report that harm. Those are the only 3 actions that make a school employee or a school civilly liable. That's just common sense. You and I don't work for a school. If you and I were to commit any one of those acts, we would be civilly liable. We need to lift the veil, the shield that's covering the bad actors. It's just way overdue. Way overdue.
And there's no question that there is some language in some of the code and laws that you will hear legislators say, well, that already exists. We have to remember how many laws that everybody knows in our country that are in place that aren't enforced. The border. So these need to be locked down really well and be very clear that there's no wiggle room around this, and that there is penalty for not moving forward with the proper reporting and proper investigation and proper adjudication of these. Is that fair to say that?
That's absolutely right. And, a part of that, the civil liability piece is understanding that, again, to your point, we're not looking for frivolous lawsuits, and we're not looking for awards into the tens of millions. There are real harms, and lawyers who argue in the courts know that this is completely consistent with what they have to prove. There are real harms being done to children, physical harms, emotional, mental, psychological harms. Sometimes children who've been abused in schools just can't even bring themselves to walk back through the door of the bus or the school where they've been abused. That makes perfect sense. Where those things have happened and where those damages have been incurred, the state and that employee need to be liable for making that child whole again. And we can do that with common sense without bankrupting school districts. But if there's a question about that, we have a bigger problem. If we're looking at lawsuits like this bankrupting school districts, I'd like to say, how come we have so many abusers in our schools? What came first, the chicken or the egg? This is going to force schools to clean up their pre-hiring processes and make sure that their background checks are actually legitimate, and they're not going to allow these people to work in our schools anymore.
Well, I think this is great common sense priority, and I look forward to being down in Austin and advocating for this common sense issue. And then your last big 3 is end taxpayer-funded lobbying in Texas education. So let's talk about taxpayer-funded lobbying in Texas education, and then I want to bounce something off you regarding taxpayer-funded lobbying, a question that I get asked a lot here locally. So tell us about your 3rd main priority.
Well, you mentioned that there are a lot of people. It's a big system, Texas public education. And what we find is that local control is kind of a sham. It doesn't really exist. And the reason why is because the big system. And we are paying a lot of taxpayer funds to organizations that represent schools in Austin. But often, what we found last session, every time parents showed up for a transparency bill or something that would work in the favor of students or parents, we found that those taxpayer-funded lobbying groups were the ones on the other side. So our tax dollars shouldn't be used against us when we're trying to fight for transparency and safety of children. And that's probably what's going to happen again in this session, too. We'd like to see an abolition of taxpayer funds being used to pay these lobby groups who show up to fight against parents. There's a movement on this across the board, like no taxpayer-funded lobbying anywhere at all times. But I think most people agree the greatest abuses are actually happening in education. I would encourage people who are interested in this topic to consider narrowing their field to just ending this in Texas education and find out how it helps clean up the system. We can get after the other parts of this, the other regional or municipal areas after we test it here in education. And when you look at the state budget, Texas education, the spending for that is the largest line item in the state budget. I mean, $80-90 billion or something like that for the biennium right now. We need to get the lobbyists out of here, and we need to clean up what's happening in education. We're essentially just creating vendor bills, and that happens because of lobbyists. Take the lobbyists out of education, and we're going to see a lot of, I think, not only improvement, but probably efficiency. I think we're going to see a lot more efficiency and a lot more fairness in education if we do it.
Well, and I support exactly what this priority is: taxpayer-funded lobbying, education. And I frequently hear in the local commissioners' court, in local other political subdivisions not related to school districts, that they are fearful of losing their ability to go advocate for rural Texas down in Austin. And I would be against that. I think that our local representative, our local volunteers who don't get a paycheck, who don't, they should be able to go to Austin and advocate for their communities. This is education specific, and I think it's a great thing. I think that there's way too much money involved in pushing outside of agendas, outside of Texas money coming in on a big scale.
Sure.
So I look forward to seeing how this progresses, and I look forward to a standalone bill for Texas for to end taxpayer-funded lobbying and education.
Yeah, it's clear that when we talked about the systemic nature of these problems, it's because these groups are actually providing legal counsel, guidance, and interpretation of the law that has all of the school districts and all of the administrators acting in a certain way. And that certain way is being represented in all corners of the state. And that's how we know that they have an outsized influence over education. And it's an unfair one because, a local and like a more rural school can't respond to something in the way it should best because they're responding in the way that the block has decided they will respond. And it's unjust.
Well, and they stay in their little echo chambers. Like, most school district trustees and most residents only go to their one school district. So they hear this term independent school district, and they think that all those decisions are being made organically to that community. They are not.
That's
right. I encourage every single trustee, every superintendent, and every resident to go to multiple school board meetings and get out there and see how much is being driven top down that they're forced to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they have some local control with some of their local policy flexibility, but this is being driven from Austin, and it's being driven via taxpayer-funded lobbying, and it's a big deal. And there's a lot of money at stake, and it's not benefiting local Texans.
That's right. If we want to put the independent back in independent school district, this is the best way to get it done.
Absolutely. Yep. So those are your three top priorities. What's the last one you wanted to talk about before we talk about what parents can do to contact you with some of their issues and wrap this up and hopefully start working together to doing a regular show?
Yes, thank you. Well, our last priority is restoring educational excellence. There are a lot of pieces and parts that go into that. Obviously, schools are for educating, so we'd rather be talking about the academic issues. We know that half the kids can't read, and we know that about 40% of kids can do math near grade level. Look, there's so much that needs to be fixed here. We'd like to see some of these governance issues removed from the places where they are now. They're inside the TEA. We need to remove those things and hopefully put them in the hands of an independent agency that can deal with them so that TEA can focus back on the academic issues. There are loads of them. A local law enforcement guy in my area, he said to me, when it comes to education, we've become so cross-functional. We've forgotten what our primary mission is. And that is exactly what's happened. He couldn't be more right about it. And so we want to be part of the solutions that allow TEA to go back and focus on the academic concerns of our students. They are great. And so, yes, thank you. I do encourage people to visit our website. It is texased911.com. And there's a number of things you can do there. You can learn a little bit more about us. But there's two particular things we'd love for you to do there. If you scroll to the bottom of the page, you'll see a tab there that says share your story. And again, if you're a parent whose child has been harmed in a public school and you need help, this is the place to go to ask for help. If you're a teacher and you're facing coercion, or you've been pushed out of the school system, or you're trying to report something and you're being mistreated, please share your story there. That's how our advocates can connect with you and help you advocate for yourself or for your child. I will say one thing about that. We only deal with stories that have evidence because, we just can't. We can't take hearsay. So please consider identifying what your evidence is. You have an opportunity to share information with us there. But it's important when you're dealing with schools. I hate to say this now, but this is the situation we're in. If your child is harmed in a Texas public school, you need to report that to outside law enforcement. Most school districts have an ISD police, but we're not finding that this has been a very fruitful avenue to pursue just outcomes. So please report any issue of legitimate harm. If there's somebody giving your child drugs or sharing porn pictures or asking for them, being inappropriate with your student, harming them physically, report that to outside law enforcement. And then essentially everything you do with the school district, you need to record. Too many times our words are being twisted and the record is being rewritten. And we just can't stand for that. So you need to maintain your own record of what happens and what conversations you have. That's very key. So please share your story and any evidence you have, and then one of our advocates will reach out to you. And then finally, on the top tab, all the way over on the right, please sign up to receive our updates. We will be sending updates as the legislative session rolls out, and we would love to keep you informed of what you can do to be a part of that solution-minded outcomes that we're looking for. So I appreciate you and read the misconduct report. It's an absolute mind blower, but I really appreciate you helping us get launched and introducing ourselves today, and look forward to seeing you down in Austin in the 89th.
Well, it's going to be a good one, and thanks for doing what you're doing. People don't realize how much time and energy a lot of these local advocacy groups put in, how expensive it is, time consuming it is to go to Austin. You and I both have testified well after midnight while they're sorting through stuff in committee. So once again, Texas Ed 911, that is texased911.com. We're going to try to figure out a way to have some consistent updates about what's going on in the legislative session with all things education and with these legislative priorities, and we look forward to that. Eileen, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to announcing when your first regular podcast will be launching.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Have a great day.